Now, the Section 89 independent panel of experts is today expected to officially start its assessment of whether President Cyril Ramaphosa has a case to answer regarding his handling of the Phala Phala farm theft. Ramaphosa was given 10 days to respond to questions fielded by MPs to the three-member panel chaired by former Chief Justice Sandile Ngcobo. The process is in line with Section 89 of the Constitution, which deals with grounds for the removal of a president from office. Now, the independent panel will only be able to recommend whether the president should face an impeachment inquiry, but the final decision will rest with the National Assembly. Political commentator Oliver Dickson joins us now for this discussion. Good to have you, Oliver. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Leah. Good morning.
So, according to this motion, the president is facing 4 charges which relate to the reporting of the crime and the conflict of personal interests in his official position. What do you envisage from this process, which is meant to test whether Ramaphosa broke the law or not, and its outcome? And this, of course, is going to eventually be decided on by the National Assembly.
Yeah. So, I mean, the Section 89 committee is not going to decide whether or not Ramaphosa broke the law. That's not its terms of reference, and neither would it have the capacity to do so. All the committee needs to establish is whether or not there's prima facie evidence and grounds for an impeachment debate. Not an impeachment, just an impeachment debate. And then, as you say, that's off to the National Assembly. Bodies that are looking at statutes of the law having been broken rest upon the SIU, the Hawks, as well as the Public Protector, to a lesser extent, not a criminal extent, as would be the case with the SIU as well as the Hawks. The Section 89 committee just needs to ask the question, was there reasonable apprehension of bias? That's to say, was there a reasonable ground for a conflict of interest to exist? And if the answer is yes, which it surely should be, then a debate can take place on that ground. Did Ramaphosa is there a reasonable expectation that he had a duty to report one reports the money that he had foreign currency in his possession first, and second, is there a reasonable expectation that he had a duty to report to the National Assembly as well as the police that a crime had taken place at his property? If the answer to that is also yes, then grounds for a debate also does exist.
All right. So there have been calls, and we've been hearing them one after the next, and I think the whole issue of stepping aside. And some are saying, shouldn't the president step aside while waiting for the outcome? Is this a reasonable expectation or not really in what that step aside rule actually says?
The bar for moral politics is so low in the country that the standard we try to use now is the ANC's step-aside standard, where the argument is one of have you been criminally charged for corruption and fraud-related matters. While that is sufficient for the ANC and good for them, it should not be sufficient for you and I as voters. You and I as voters should hold politicians to a higher level of accountability, and that is where we see that there is a reasonable moment where the president could have erred both morally as well as legally, that we should then ask the president to step aside. And certainly that is the case over here. In any other normal functioning democracy, the president would have been asked to step aside pending the outcome of these investigations, or to just vacate office altogether. And that typically does happen around the world in more developed democracies. Certainly not over here, where presidents try to prevaricate from answering any sort of questions that seek to hold them accountable.
So let's take a look and see. I mean, we know that the former presidents have been very vocal about the leadership of President Ramaphosa. I mean, each week there's a different story coming out, whether it be former President Mbeki or whether it be Jacob Zuma. Now we see it's the turn, I think again, former President Kgalema Motlanthe. And this was in an article in the Sunday Times yesterday. And I mean, pretty much so to quote, the former president goes on and says that President Ramaphosa's refusal to provide a full explanation of the robbery of his Phala Phala farm communicates a certain message. And he's basically saying that this scandal and not providing clarity is damaging the presidency. So talk to me about this sentiment as well. I mean, would you agree with what Motlanthe is saying?
Yes, certainly. And it carries a lot more credibility coming from President Motlanthe than it does, say, from President Mbeki, right? That's because President Motlanthe has always stayed out of the ring of political engagement and political value judgment. He's, by all intents and purposes, the Switzerland of ANC presidents. He seeks peace. When he speaks about the politics of the country, he does not place blame on one specific person. That is to say, when Mbeki speaks, for instance, it's quite clear who he is attributing blame to and who is not attributing blame to. Motlanthe has stayed clear of doing that for a very long time. For him to come out and directly speak to that and say Phala Phala really is a stain on the ANC's attempt at renewal at the moment means that he feels very, very strongly about it. But it means that that is the conversation happening within the ranks of the ANC. Motlanthe would not be speaking in isolation. This is certainly stuff that he would have been discussing with comrades in the ranks, specifically amongst veterans and senior leaders in the country. And if Ramaphosa is starting to lose their confidence, as is the case, then it means that his second term as presidency is really in doubt at the moment.
I mean, we've also heard the tourism minister, Lindiwe Sisulu, having the same sentiments, and she brought up the whole step aside. But we also know that she's in the race. She wants to get in there too. So I suppose we need to also put that into context. But I want to talk a little bit more about the former presidents. I mean, we've spoken about what Motlanthe had said, and also coming out and saying that not even the ANC knows anything about this Phala Phala issue, which again brings a lot of suspicion in. I mean, if nobody knows about what happened, and there is so much money and silence and secrecy around this issue, it might bring about, well, it has brought about a lot of speculation. When we see these former presidents speaking out against the incumbent, what does that say about what's happening in the internal wranglings about the ANC? I mean, in previous years, it was unheard of speaking about presidents and leaders the way it is being spoken about now.
I mean, Ramaphosa is yet to appear before the ANC Integrity Committee on the Phala Phala matter, right? And 2 or 3 days after the story broke initially, he said he will appear before the Integrity Committee. It's been months later, and he still hides behind a sub judice rule to the Integrity Committee saying, let the investigative bodies do their investigative work, and once they've completed, we will then do that. That rule doesn't exist. Doesn't exist in the constitution of the ANC either, and he should appear before the Integrity Commission. At this moment, the commission and the party, especially the NEC, would feel undermined by Ramaphosa. Why is this guy not taking us into his confidence? For instance, when Nkandla happened, right? However tough and awkward the questions may have been, at least Zuma gave answers, however unconvincing and unpersuasive the answers may have been, despite the fact that there were multiple investigations underway in relation to Nkandla. Zuma gave the ANC answers about it, right? Whether or not they like the answers is a different set of questions. Ramaphosa has remained mum, not given a single answer. The only place Ramaphosa has spoken about it was the 2 or 3 questions he faced about it in front of the National Assembly when he was doing his Q&A. And even then, he was dancing around the answer and refusing to answer, simply saying, let the investigative bodies do their investigative work and let the law run its course. Firstly, there's no rule that prevents him from speaking about it. The only thing preventing him from speaking about it would be his own politically moral compass, and perhaps many would argue his own consciousness. But at this point, the ANC feels disregarded by Ramaphosa. And that is not unusual. That would certainly trickle up to the most senior members of the party, who also feel like, as the guardians, as the moral guardians of the party, they deserve to know what's going on. And if they're in the dark as much as you and I are, Leanne, then something is completely broken in the ANC's infrastructure in holding its politicians accountable.
I mean, Oliver, this has been going on for several months now. I mean, we heard about this from Arthur Fraser. I'm trying to think of the exact month, but it's been several months. Where are the hawks? Where's the MPA? We're hearing from, obviously, leaders within the ANC who are lamenting the president. Everybody has a say in this. But where is the legality in all of this? I mean, this is obviously, we've heard denials from the president that it was that amount of money. But more than that, we don't know. And so there is speculation. But the law, where does that fit into it all?
To you and I, 7 months is very slow in political terms, but 7 months is lightning speed to law enforcement agencies, including the courts. We must recognize that those are agencies with a higher standard of scrutiny than you and I would place on, say, the court of the public opinion, right? They need to collect evidence, corroborate evidence, cross-interview people, and then start analyzing it against the relevant statutes. In the instance of the public protector, for instance, the public protector tells us that in their least complex investigation, it takes at least 6 months. In the least complex investigation, it takes at least 6 months. This is by all means a complex investigation where there are multiple statutes, several actors, and even international actors involved, right? So that level of complexity means that it will take a little bit longer from even the public protector, who operates at a lower standard of investigation tightness than, say, the hawks that has to reach a case of criminality, that has to then work with the NPA about it. The public protector does not have that, yet also takes, at least in its least complex investigation, 6 months. Yeah. We should then expect the hawks to take a little bit longer than that, right? And that is to say, we should not expect an answer before December from any of these parties, due to the complexity of the nature.
But Oliver, I mean, the reality is this happened in 2020. I mean, we know that, and the date was out there, and it was apparently reported. So almost that time frame doesn't make sense, does it?
We know that to be a lie. Every investigative body said nothing was ever reported to us in 2020, including the police. So certainly nothing was reported. Ramaphosa said he expected that Wally Rude would have reported it. Wally said, no, I had no such, Wally didn't give us a response to that effect, except to say that he did what he was supposed to do. So nothing was reported. If Arthur Fraser never blew the whistle on this, we would have known nothing.
Yeah, it's just the questions, the unanswered questions, and the story is really a massive one. And I think a lot of South Africans are wanting to hear some answers to this, and clearly so does his party, because it's just such a massive story that's getting fingers pointed from every direction. Unfortunately, Oliver, I've got to leave it there. We've already hit 7 o'clock here on the program. But that was political commentator and SAFM talk show host Oliver Dickson talking to us about the Section 89 process undertaken by Parliament leading up to a decision by the National Assembly on whether Ramaphosa should remain in office or not.